بالله العلي العظيم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. Okay, here we are on our 13th session of Ibn Arabi, Redux, chapter of Noah, one of the most controversial of the chapters that has had generations of the Orthodox pulling their hair over some of the things that Ibn Arabi says in here. So here we go. The wisdom of exaltation in the word of Noah. He says, for those who truly know the divine realities, the doctrine of transcendence imposes a restriction and a limitation on the reality, for he who asserts that God is purely transcendent is either a fool or a rogue, or even if he professes to be a believer. For if he maintains that God is purely transcendent and excludes all other considerations, he acts mischievously and misrepresents the reality and all the apostles, albeit unwittingly. He imagines that he has hit on the truth while he has completely missed the mark, being like those who believe in part and deny it in part. It is known that when the scriptures speak of the reality, they speak in a way that yields to the generality of men the immediately apparent meaning. The elite, on the other hand, understand all the meanings inherent in that utterance in whatever terms it is expressed. The truth is that the reality is manifest in every created being and in every concept, while he is at the same time hidden from all understanding, except for one who holds that the cosmos is his form and his identity. This is the name, the manifest, while he is also unmanifested spirit, the unmanifest. In this sense, he is in relation to the manifested forms of the cosmos, the spirit that determines those forms. In any definition of man, his inner and outer aspect are both to be considered, as is the case with all objects of definition. As for the reality, he may be defined by every definition, for the forms of the cosmos are limitless, nor can the definition of every form be known, except insofar as the forms are implicit in the definition of the cosmos. Thus, a true definition of the reality is impossible, for such a definition would depend on the ability to fully define every form in the cosmos, which is impossible. Therefore, a complete definition of the reality is impossible. It is similar in the case of one who professes the comparability of God without taking into consideration his incomparability, so that he also restricts and limits him and therefore does not know him. He, however, who unites in his knowledge of God both transcendence and immanence in a comprehensive way, is not being possible to know such a thing in detail, owing to the infinitude of cosmic forms, knows him in a general way, but not in a detailed way, as he may know himself generally, but not in detail. In this connection, the prophet said, who truly knows himself knows his Lord, linking together knowledge of God and knowledge of the self. God says, we will show them our signs in the horizons, meaning the world outside you and in yourselves. Self here meaning your inner essence, till it becomes clear to them that he is the reality, in that you are his form and he is your spirit. You are in relation to him as your physical body is to you. He is in relation to you as the spirit governing your physical form. This definition of you takes account of your outer and inner aspects, for the form that remains when the governing spirit is no longer present may no longer be called a man, but only a form resembling a man, there being no real difference between it and the shape of wood or stone. The name man may be given to such a form only figuratively, but not properly. On the other hand, the reality never withdraws from the forms of the cosmos in any fundamental sense, since the cosmos in its reality is necessarily implicit in the definition of the divinity, not merely figuratively, as with a man when living in the body. Just as the outer form of man gives praise with its tongue to its spirit and the soul that rules it, so also did God cause the cosmic form to give praise to him, although we cannot understand its praise by reason of our inability to comprehend all the forms of the cosmos. All things are the tongues of the reality, giving expression to the praise of the reality of the reality. God says, praise belongs to God, the Lord of the world, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. For all praise returns to him, who is both the praiser and the praised. There was a slightly similar phrase yesterday that we read in the liturgies, in the first one in Surah Wadi. If you insist only on his transcendence, you restrict him, and if you insist only on his immanence, you limit him. If you maintain both aspects, you are right, an imam and a master in the spiritual sciences. Whoso would say he is two things is a polytheist, while the one who isolates him tries to regulate him. Beware of comparing him if you profess duality, and if unity, beware of making him transcendent. You're not he, and you are he. And you see him in the essence of things, both boundless and limited. God says, there is not like unto him, asserting his transcendence, and he says he is the hearing, the seeing, implying comparison. On the other hand, there are implicit in the first quotation comparison, albeit negative, and duality in the word like, ka. And in the second quotation, transcendence and isolation are implicit, he alone being named. Had Noah combined the two aspects in summoning his people, they would have responded to his call. He appealed to their outer and inner understanding, saying, ask your Lord to shield you from your sins, for he is forgiving. Then he said, I summoned them by night inwardly and by day outwardly, but my summons only made them more averse or outer. He states that his people turned a deaf ear to his summons only because they knew innately the proper way for them, maintaining God's immanence in many forms, to respond to his summons, made from the standpoint of unity and transcendence. Those who know God understand the illusion Noah makes in respect of what he knows to be the real state of his people, in that by blaming them, he praises them, since he knows the reason for their non-responding positively to his summons. The reason being that his summons was made in a spirit of discrimination, seeking to oppose transcendence to immanence. The whole truth is a conjunction, al-Quran, or Qarana, as the whole revelation and not a discrimination, al-Furqan, Faraka, a chapter of the Quran. One who is firmly established in his knowledge of the conjunction does not dwell on the discrimination. For the former, al-Quran includes the discrimination, the chapter, both aspects in their apparent opposition, and not vice versa. It is for this reason that the Quran, the union of two aspects, was vouchsafed to Muhammad and his community, which is the best granted to humanity. The quotation, there's nothing like unto him, laysa kamithlihi shay, combines the two aspects. Had Noah uttered this kind of saying in summoning his people, they would have responded positively to him, for he would have combined in the single verse the transcendental and immanental modes, nay, even in half a verse. Noah summoned his people by night in that he appeared to their intellects and spirits, which are unseen, and by day in that he appealed to the evidence of their external senses. But he did not unite the two, as in the verse, there's nothing like unto him. For this reason, their inner selves, given to the immanental aspect, recoiled from the summons because of its discriminatory nature, making them even more averse, outer. Then he told them that he summoned them in order that God might shield them from the sins of excessive immanence, and not to reveal or uncover for them his transcendence as an absolute. This they understood from him according to their outer senses, so that they put their fingers in their ears and tried to cover themselves with their clothes. This is an external form of shielding to which he has summoned them, although they responded literally by their actions and not in humble surrender to God's shielding. In the verse, there's nothing like unto him, similarity is at once implied and denied. Because of this, Muhammad said that he had been granted knowledge of God, integrating all his aspects. Muhammad, unlike Noah, did not summon his people by day and by night and by day, but by night during the day, an inner summons implicit in the outer one, and by day during the night, the outer truth being implicit in the inner. Noah, as his wisdom, said to them, he causes the heaven to rain upon you copiously, meaning intellectual knowledge and reflection, and has provided you with the reserves of wealth by which he reserves you to himself. When he does this, you will see your form in him. Whoever imagines that he sees the reality himself has no gnosis. He has gnosis who knows that it is his own essential self he sees. Thus are the folk divided into those who know and those who do not know. And his offspring, meaning that which results from their ordinary discursive thinking, but what is required in devotion of knowledge to contemplation, far removed from the fruits of ordinary thought. It will only increase them in loss, and their commerce will not profit them, meaning that that which they had within their grasp and which they imagined to be theirs departed from them. In respect of Muhammad's heirs, he says, make use of that over which you have been appointed regents. In the case of Noah and his people, he says, have you not taken a trustee other than me? By this, he confirms that in their case, the power was theirs, God being trustee for them, while in the case of the heirs of Muhammad, they are God's regents in his kingdom, God being both possessor and trustee, while they are possessors only in the sense that they are regents. Thus, the reality is ruler of the kingdom as indicated by Tirmidhi. And they hatched a great conspiracy, meaning that summoning to God in one mode is in a sense a deception played on the one summoned, since God is no more non-existent in the first mode, that of the one summoned, than in the second. I call to God, which is deception itself with clear vision, indicating that the whole, both modes, belong to him. Thus they, for their part, responded to him with a deception as he has summoned them with one. The heir of Muhammad knows that the summons to God is not a summons to his ipseity, but to him in respect of his names. He says, on the day when we will gather together the guarding ones in a hand, indicating that they will come before God in the all-embracing name, the merciful, not before God in his essence. We know that the cosmos is under the rule of a divine name and makes all in it guarded. In their deception, they say, do not abandon your gods, neither Wad, Suwa, Yaghut, nor Ya'uq, nor Nast. If they had abandoned them, they would have become ignorant of the reality to the extent that they deserted them. For in every object of worship, there is a reflection of the reality, whether it be recognized or not. In the case of Muhammad's heirs, he says, your Lord has decreed that you serve only him, meaning he has determined it. The one who knows who is worshipped and in what form he is manifest to be worshipped. He also knows that the distinction and multiplicity of forms are merely like parts of a sensible form or the powers of a spiritual image. Indeed, every object of worship it is in truth God's who is worshipped. The ignorant man imagines the object to be invested with divinity, and were it not for such a notion, neither the stone nor anything similar would be the object of worship. For this reason, he says, bid them name them. Had they done so, they would have called them stones, trees, or stars. Had they been asked whom they worshiped, they would have said a god, and not God or the God. The man endowed with knowledge does not imagine thus, but knows that the object of worship is the vehicle of divine manifestation, worthy of reverence, while not restricting himself to that particular object. The ignorant man says, we only worship them that they might bring us nearer to God. The man of knowledge says, your God is only one, so submit yourselves to him, howsoever he is manifest, and bring glad tidings to those who conceal, that is, who conceal the fire of their lowly nature. they would say a God and not a nature, something passive. He also says they have caused confusion to many, meaning that they have caused them to become perplexed in the face of the apparent multiplicity of the one in respect of his aspects and attributions. It only increases the oppressors in confusion, meaning those who oppress themselves by self-denial, who inherit the book of unitary knowledge. These are the first of the three categories described by God elsewhere, since he places the self-oppressor before the moderate one and the doer of good works. In confusion, that is, in spiritually self-effacing perplexity on the part of the heirs of Muhammad, who said, "My Lord, increase my perplexity concerning you." When the self-revelation of the one, shines for them, they proceed. But when it shines not, because of the multiplicity of forms, they stop in perplexity. He who experiences this perplexity is ceaselessly centered on the pole God, while he who follows the long path to a distant God is always turning aside from the supreme goal to search after that which is eternally within it, running after imagination as his goal. He has an imaginary starting point and what he supposes to be a goal and what lies between them. While for the God-centered man, there is no restriction of beginning or end, possessing as he does the most comprehensive existence and being the recipient of divine truths and realities. Because of their transgressions, going beyond themselves so that they drowned in the seas of the knowledge of God, which is what is meant by perplexity. And they were cast into the fire, which means the same as drowning according to the heirs. When the seas swell, where the same verbal root is used to denote the heating of an oven. Nor will they find any helpers apart from God, since their helpers are in essence nothing other than God, and they are annihilated in him forever. Were he to deliver them from the seas of gnosis unto the shore of nature, he would be lowering them from an eminent stage of spiritual attainment that is relatively eminent, although in truth all is God's, through God indeed is God. Noah said, "O my Lord." He did not say, "O my God," because God as the Lord is fixed, whereas the divinity is manifold according to the variety of his names, and every day he is upon some new task. God as the Lord denotes a constancy of mode without which the appeal would not be appropriate. O my Lord, do not leave any of the deniers dwelling upon earth, that is, on the level of devotion to formal manifestation, beseeching that they be brought to the inner aspect of the knowledge of essential unity. In respect of Muhammad's hairs, it might be said, if you let down a rope, it would fall upon God, he being below and above. And his is what is in the heavens and the earth. When you are buried in it, you will be in it, and it will be your covering. To it we will return you, and from it we will bring you forth a second time, because of the variety of aspects. Of the deniers who seek to cover themselves in their clothes and to put their fingers into their ears, seeking cover because he summoned them that he might shield or forgive them, which is a kind of covering. Dwelling, that is, any of them at all, so that the benefit might be general as was the summons. If you spare them, that is, leave them as they are, they will confuse your servants, meaning they will perplex them and cause them to depart from their servanthood to assert the mysteries of lordship in themselves, so that they will consider themselves as lords after being servants. They will indeed be servants, become as lords. They will only bring forth, they will only produce and make manifest one who breaks open for the wrongdoer. That is one who makes manifest what is hidden, and one who denies. That is one who conceals what is manifest after its manifestation. They will bring forth what is hidden and then conceal it after its manifestation, so that the beholder will be perplexed, not knowing what the discloser intends by his action, nor the concealer by his, though they are in truth the same. My Lord, shield or forgive me, that is, conceal me from my separate self, and cover for my sake other than you, and render my relative span and station unknowable in you, since you are without measure. You say they do not assess God to the fullness of his measure, and my parents, whom I derive, namely the intellect and nature, and whoever enters my house, that is into my heart, believing that is confirming the divine communications, having himself received them. And the believers, both men, meaning the intellects, and women, the souls. And do not increase the oppressors, those in darkness who belong to the unseen, concealed behind dark veils, except in destruction, that is, in annihilation in God. They have consciousness of themselves because their contemplation of the face of the reality absorbs them to the exclusion of their separative selves. Among the hairs is remembered the verse, all perish save his face. The destruction in the above verse meaning this perishing. Whoever wishes to gain access to the Noah mysteries must ascend to the sphere of the sun. These matters are also dealt with in our book, the Meccan Revelations. And that was the very controversial chapter of Noah, where Ibn Arabi is at his best. And now the floor is open. Whoever wants to go first. Jeff, you want to go first?
Okay. Um, yeah, there's a lot to say there. That was beautiful, by the way. Not only controversial, but extremely beautiful, I thought. Um, yeah, yeah, there's a lot to say there. So, first of all, you were right. I recall you and your conversation with Hassan last night, at the end of our session last night, and you said that was a good segue into this session. And boy, you nailed it there. That was a great segue.
Yeah, it's a good segue.
Um, Also, I remember the last week I asked about whether it was possible to know one's eternal predisposition, and
Mm,
you gave a great answer, which I can't recall like word for word, but that was also the same answer was given in this chapter that you gave me last
yeah,
week, basically, which is you can know, only not completely, not in
yeah.
all of its details, some detail, but of course not all of the details. So I saw that in this chapter. Um,
I've had
Also,
a question about this myself for a very long time. I'll just mention it. Is it the case that we cannot know this in its intricate details? It is because much of the intricate details are those details that do not even belong to us.
yeah, right.
You know,
Yeah,
that is the only resolution that, what Ibn Arabi is silent about. Because if you can only know that predisposition that belongs to you, and you can only know it generally and not specifically, then that suggests that the reason why you cannot know it specifically in its very intricate detail is because those intricate details are elements that are shared beyond yourself.
right,
That's
right. That
that's
makes
the only
sense.
resolution to that for me.
Plus, not only that, no, that makes perfect sense, but also, you know, we say know thyself, and that's one of the problems also is that a lot of people don't even know themselves. Like even that which is peculiar to themselves, they don't really recognize or understand very well. So it's, self exploration and self discovery is part of a spiritual path, obviously. So yeah, there's a couple of different things going on. We don't know ourselves that well to begin with, and then, like you said, uh, there's a lot of things that aren't even our business that pertain to other people.
Or other
But
things,
anyway,
not even people.
yes, yeah, exactly, right. Yeah, like yeah, natural things and whatnot. I found it interesting the concept of God's folk, folk with a capital F. I always assumed that those were like Gnostics, those who know.
Yes.
But I see in this chapter it's not necessarily so. Like he kind of divided the folk with a big F into two camps, kind of. I should be referring to the text here, but I think he broke them, divided them into two: those who know and those who are ignorant, basically.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to ask this too. The last paragraph, whoever wishes to gain access to the Noah mysteries must ascend to the sphere of the sun.
Mm.
I found that particularly interesting because we're studying in the other course, Suriwardi's Ishraq,
Yeah.
and I wonder if these two can go hand in hand. Like he could represent the sphere of the sun in that way.
Well, we're giving it a shot, so whatever
Yeah.
we get out of this dual process of reading Sohrabadi and Ibn Arabi together, um, people are saying that they're getting a lot out of this kind of joint reading. One complements the other. I agree.
Mm, yeah.
One does complement the other very well.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. I think I had something else to say, but it's on the tip of my tongue. I'll let somebody else go for now. But thank you.
Sure. Who wants to go next? Jump in. Don't wait for me to ask you.
Okay, if you insist. Okay, Salam Sheikh. Yeah. So my question's on page 77. So he's talking about Muhammad. Muhammad, unlike Noah, did not summon his people by night and by day, but by night during the day, which is an inner summons implicit in the other one, in the outer one, and by day during the night, with the outer truth being implicit in the inner. I was just wondering if we could get something to illustrate this, and what is Ibn Arabi himself doing as a seal of saints? Is he?
Well, look at the verses from the Quran that he's invoking throughout this chapter. One that runs throughout this chapter is nothing is like unto him. That verse is grammatically serves as an extremely important meditation device for the Sufis because in Arabic we have the word like occurring twice. One as a particle and then one as the word proper. So laisa ka mith. Ka is the particle of likeness. Myth also mean likeness or similitude or whatever. So this occurrence, this grammatical construction is very, it's very rich in contemplation, right? Because nothing is like the like of him is one way to translate it, right? So this established the transcendence. This is the apathetic path. So every likeness that you think has to be stripped of that likeness because nothing is like the like, right? But then the verse completes by saying, and he is the hearing and seeing, or the seeing to hear, right? So then now we have the immanence because it's comparing God to human faculties, sight and sound or hearing. So what this means is that what Islam, at least what Ibn Arabi is contending with the Quran, is doing, it is doing two things actually four things simultaneously. It is instancing divine transcendence, but also simultaneously divine immanence. It is both appealing to the outer reality of things and simultaneously to the inner reality of things. So that verse, we shall show them there's our signs and the horizons and themselves is one instance of this, right? He is bringing this all synthetically together to say that Noah didn't do this. All that Noah did was just tell these people, you're sinners and there's only one God but God, and just left the matter at that. Whereas had he said similar things as the Quran says, he's the first, the last, the manifest, the hidden, or nothing is like his like, and he is the hearing and the seeing, appealing to both the transcendence and immanence simultaneously, this would have resolved the matter. And what he is doing here, you have to go back to the very first paragraph where he attacks the transcendentalists. He says these people are rogues. If you are only instancing the divine transcendence to the exclusion of the divine immanence, you are actually stripping any kind of validity to your revelation. Okay, because what is the point of worshiping an inaccessible, transcendent God that is not present in the world? who by definition then doesn't answer any prayers, doesn't, which is the deist God, right? What is the point of religion? What connection does the created have to the creator? If even, we use Gnostic language to say, you talk about divine sparks, being deposited in the soul of people who have fallen from the pleroma. Yet even in that Gnostic account, right, whatever its problems, there's still an admission that there is that divine spark imminently present. Whereas with Orthodox religionists and Jews especially, in Jewish theology, they overemphasize this transcendent, put God so at a remove from everything, for all created things, wanting to strip any resemblance of the creator to the created. And they do that for the sole reason of putting a complete remove, a gaping chasm between God and the world. This basically shatters the very foundations of the very revelation and religious law that they're trying to appeal to people to follow. Whereas an immanent God, and then the question is, well, what do we mean by the immanence of God? And this is where then Ibn Arabi explains what immanence entails. If you have both aspects happening at the same time, that is how you make the call. And this is what the Quran did. What Muhammad did. He appealed to the outer and inner.
Okay, cool. That answers it very well. Another thing that I was wondering is we know that humans can be in rebellion, as humans are, kind of godlike in our way, and we have our free will and all that stuff. I was wondering if it's possible for the cosmos to be in rebellion.
Depends what we define rebellion by, because according to this kind of ontology, even every rebellion at some level is at the will of God. So if that is the case, does that rebellion really constitute a rebellion? Right? Because in this interplay, this theater of the names, nothing is outside of the purview of the essence. Everything is is encircled by God. So, and penetrated by God. The very motivation of things, as it were, is God, already always. So what is being rebelled against?
Right, yeah, that's what occurred to me as I said that. I'm just like, oh wait, I forgot about this whole conflict of the names thing.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Anybody want to go next?
I'll just jump back in right quick here because I thought of what I was going to say, but I just want to hear your answer, even though I'm pretty sure I already know what you might say. But like when we talk about infidels or unbelievers or, the ignorant ones, sinners, I wonder when Ibn Arabi talks about them, if he's just talking about the general population or if he's talking about, you know, uh, like God's folk who refused to hear Noah. You know what I mean? Who refused to respond positively to Noah's summons.
Hmm.
I mean, are we talking about everybody, like every Tom, Dick, and Harry? You know what I mean? In terms of the sinners, or are we talking about that
Well,
division? Because it does say, by the way,
yeah.
God's
Well,
folk, He made that
here he's
division.
taking the concept of sinners in a very novel way. He's taking those condemnatory verses of the Quran and just completely flipping their surface meanings on their heads and referring them to the Sufis, right?
Right, yeah.
And their path towards annihilation in God, right?
Right.
With the sinner, if we take that in the negative sense, being the nafs before its annihilation.
Right. Okay. So that's what I thought. I was thinking he might have something specific in mind. He not just talking about like in today's age. I mean, I think things were probably a lot different back then, but today, um, atheism is a thing, where they don't believe in anything and reject anything of any claim to any kind of spiritual reality whatsoever.
Mm.
And so I don't think necessarily he has that in mind. But yet, it's kind of related to what you were just saying to Reyes. Like even the people who are completely in darkness, like their manifestations ultimately themselves. Obviously, everything's
Yeah.
a manifestation. So anyway, I don't know if you follow my train of thought there, but I don't really have a
Yeah,
question.
I follow
But
you. I follow your train of thought. Yeah, yeah. I mean, what he's
okay,
saying is extremely controversial. I mean, he's basically calling Noah conceited and stupid for not, following a more coherent strategy of converting his people to his cause.
Mm.
So, I mean, this chapter has driven so many of the various forms of fundamentalists crazy over the years. They use this very chapter against Ibn Arabi time and time again.
Well, I can see why, because it kind of subverts their authority.
Well,
Obviously, I mean,
absolutely, it's first
if
thing.
everyone and everything is a manifestation ultimately of God, then how exactly do you identify the authority in a given community or
Mm.
jurisdiction or whatever? So that there's the controversy is the question of authority, basically. So anyway, okay, thank you. Let's
Well, I
go
mean,
ahead.
if you take Noah also as the archetype for that religious authority, in itself, what Ibn Arabi is saying is, um, be careful of these priests who come preaching transcendence to you, and denouncing your gods. I mean, this is a Muslim saying this, because he's
Mm,
not giving you the full picture. If he wants to give you the full picture, he has to also affirm your idols. But here's the problem with this. By implication, this also would apply to Muhammad himself. So is Ibn Arabi implicitly trying to condemn the Prophet of Islam for his strategy against the pagans of the Quraysh? That's the question. Is that what Ibn
Well,
Arabi is doing?
if you follow his logic all the way through
Yes.
to its conclusion, then perhaps he would have to even criticize the prophet himself. But although he did make a clear distinction in this particular chapter between
Yes, he did.
Noah and Noah's summons and
Yeah.
Muhammad's summons.
Well,
So
I mean, if he didn't, that would be a very problematic thing. Because yeah, if you follow that logic to its conclusion, what he said before he says this is the conclusion that one reaches. But however, our prophet, he did he
mm,
combined both elements of the transcendent and
mm,
immanent. Fine, you could say that. But at the same time, it was Muhammad who was condemning all the idols of these Arabs as being
yeah,
false.
right,
We have all these countless verses in the Quran, basically where
right,
the prophet is challenging these various stone and wooden deities to speak.
right, exactly. And yeah, condemning them as heathens and pagans and everything. So yeah, okay. Interesting. Yeah, so yeah, very controversial. But yet still one of the most I found it so elegant. The way he words it is just so elegant. And again, it's hard to dispute anything that he's putting forth there. But yeah, I wouldn't want to have an argument with a religious authority because they just probably, put you to death for challenging the establishment. Okay, thank
Just
you.
real quick, I mean, even we get to the same insight that Ibn Arabi has in Sohrawardi, which we read yesterday. What does Sohrawardi say? That harm and bringing harm is against the covenant of God. Sohrawardi says this unequivocally, right? Ibn Arabi says it too once we get to the chapter of David, where he's almost articulating a kind of a medieval version of human rights, literally, in the chapter of David. But in Sohrawardi, we saw that right at the beginning in the sacred inscription, where he says outright that harm is, this has never been part of the covenant of God. Yet this is what the transcendentalist, the Orthodox exotericist, he or she is constantly bringing harm upon those who believe differently than them. whether by the Jewish practice of herem, the excommunication. I was reading last night about Spinoza's excommunication by the rabbinic court of Portugal. And yeah, this is when the Jews canceled one of their own, one of the great European philosophers of all time. That's where it leads. If you believe differently, we're going to cancel you, destroy you, erase you, right? But the question emerges on whose authority. And if you say God, then the question is, what kind of God is this that requires erasure of its servants merely for believing something about it?
Yeah, and not only harm, causing harm exactly, but in the most inhumane atrocities that are
Yeah,
being committed in God's name. I mean, we're well beyond
yeah,
harm.
yeah.
Yeah,
So the question I have asked all religious, I had a debate with a Lubavitcher on the Gold Coast about 20 years ago about this, and he couldn't answer me. If your God or your religion requires by you putting words into the mouth of your God that only a certain form of worship is accepted in its sight, then that limits the omnipotence and the omniscience of that God. So you yourself are actually committing the very thing that you're accusing others of committing, whether it be through idolatry or otherwise. And I pointed out to this individual that your halacha, in a sense, your Jewish Sharia, is a form of idolatry. You're limiting God. If you take Maimonides on his word, that we cannot attribute anything to God, it's transcendent, but yet it's omnipotent, it's beyond all our concepts, if you take what he says, and Maimonides is arguing by Avicenna, then all of this other stuff, including the stuff that Maimonides himself validated in terms of the Jewish law, make no sense. There's a gaping contradiction in your logic. And you can't just appeal to the Kabbalah to fix it either, which they do.
Mm.
And in this chapter, what Ibn Arabi does and why it's controversial is that he's basically throwing the axioms of orthodoxy back in its face. And he's using the example of Noah, a prophet shared by both Jews and Muslims and Christians. Obviously, we all know the story of what happened to Noah and his people, but he's using this as an example archetypally to show the limits of the kind of thinking. And he's doing it in a very ingenious way, because you would think that Noah's people are the established order, right? And he is the one that is disrupting their order. That is one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is that the universal order of things that Ibn Arabi is arguing for is already engodded in everything. So whether you say, whether you bow towards an easterly direction at a rock in the middle, in a city near the coastline of Arabia, or you bow to an effigy, the reality of God, the all-pervading reality of God, amounts to the same thing. So then why insist on this very delimited concept of God in order to rectify a problem that you see in a people that have kind of are imbalanced in their understanding of divinity?
Mm.
This is what he's saying. But orthodoxy and exoteric religion for some reason refuses to approach things by this direction, because fundamentally it shatters its claim to exclusivity.
Yeah. And last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up. Exactly. The word hypocrisy keeps coming to mind too. I mean, obviously, hypocrisy is a huge problem in any orthodoxy, and any dispute regarding authority. But anyway, yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
No,
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum
I
salam.
actually I actually found this fascinating. I returned to the idea of the Ibn Arabi's critique of Noah. I'm not used to that within Islamic writing because of this, concept of asma.
Yeah.
You don't often see it. It's not very subtle. It's sort of in your face, and it reminded me of the I believe it was in the Jewish commentarial tradition. There's a similar debate about Noah because the Torah says Noah was righteous in his generation.
Mm.
So you have people who take a high view of Noah as the savior of humankind. And then you have other people saying, well, he didn't really try to save anybody like Ibrahim did. He didn't
Mm.
really try to argue God down. He just did the bare minimum. I think that there's kind of a parallel there. Of course, Ibn Arabi is doing something very different with this critique, but also within this chapter and within Ibn Arabi's ontology, that everything is sort of unfolding a combination of divine names. You could even say, though, that despite Noah being criticized here, Noah was doing what those names that Noah was manifesting were supposed to do.
Yeah.
This is a very interesting ontology, but it's also incredibly difficult to hold to and live an ordinary life. I find it especially true when I'm bombarded by different kinds of fascists or Israeli supremacists or
Yeah.
all these, like, what the fuck names are these people manifesting? That's routinely what I come back to.
Well, obviously the misguider, that's one of them.
Right, right. And yet I have to be humble too, because I have no idea how that name is manifesting in my life. Most of the time I might be under the spell without even realizing it.
Mm. Mm.
But
What's
that being said, I mean, I know for one thing that fascism is a line that I could never cross.
Of
So I'm not
course.
going to give these people more grace than,
Same here. Yeah.
yeah,
Amen to that. Um, we got to, I guess, then bracket this. This is how I've resolved this. You got to bracket this by ontology versus politics. As long as you don't mix
Mhm.
your ontology or your, at least your metaphysical ontology with your politics, you're okay. You can look at the Wahdat al-Wujud as it is, recognize that even these fascists are ingoted. But then on the political plane, on the realm of universal nature where we are, where duality is the rule, we can still operate politically, even though recognizing that this, that they're also in God, they're also manifesting names, but then so are we. So then this
Right.
becomes then the kind of the battle of the names. Or later, when we read in the Fusus al-Hikam, it becomes the battle of the lords.
Right. So you would prescribe sort of Krishna's advice to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita.
100%, I would, yes.
You
Yes.
you could be sad about having to fight and even destroy your kin, your family, people you otherwise might like, but if they're representing something completely unjust, immoral, and evil, that's what your duty is.
Yeah, get stuck into them. Yeah, very
Yeah,
much.
I guess, that is probably a good way to reconcile this tension. It's a tension that I feel a lot as I read different things within the Sufi genre of literature, because I feel myself so far from intuiting that. So I guess if you do bracket out the politics and you do understand that you have to do your worldly duty, I mean, what you're doing essentially is you're trying to balance Allah's attributes of severity and mercy.
Simultaneously. Yeah. So then that becomes politics, in essence, becomes that balancing act within yourself.
Right.
And that becomes very interesting, a very interesting political epistemology in and of itself, because politics has a tendency, who was it? Karl Mannheim, in his book Ideology and Utopia, kind of framed this very well, where he says, political discourse by its nature is Manichaean. It has to completely dehumanize its opponent in order to win. Its goal is to win. It's not to discover truth, right? So
Right.
what a Gnostic needs to do, especially when they enter the political fray, is to temper all of that. Understand the ontology of the unity of being, but then also understand that in this realm of universal nature, these poles exist and that we are responsible for actually acting. We can't allow, we can't just sit in the corner and say, well, if it's all God, then let God deal with it. We are God, and we
Right.
are dealing with it.
Yeah, that approach to this sort of monistic or non-dual metaphysics never really sat well with me.
Mm.
I feel that ultimately, if you want to get Marxist about it or material about it, I almost feel like it's a very privileged position to take.
Yeah.
It's a very easy way out. Whereas, every interest in my life has some kind of political dimension, whether it's my landlord or my
Mm.
boss or whatever. And I can't just turn a blind eye to the suffering of people who have it far worse than I do. I mean,
And you're not supposed to. That's the thing. You're not supposed to turn a blind eye. You're supposed to
right,
actually actively engage. So that advice of Krishna to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita is actually a prime directive. That you have to, yeah, it's all one, fine, but you also have to do your part.
right,
Evil can abide in the land, and yet God is still one. It makes no difference. And this is a concept that is very difficult to get what's head around, because conventional theological thinking wants to have evidence of the goodness of God in the material realities. But yet, this is not how things work. There's a complexity to the material reality that also then requires the God in human form to act upon things, and not just leave everything to chance.
right. And so much of the Odyssey, I think, gets tripped up on this paradox, if you will. There are certain ways in which the universe is configured that don't have human well-being or biological well-being at heart. I mean, we're sort of existing within an ecosystem of very hostile forces that make up this majestic universe.
Mm.
And yet that kind of evil is much more tolerable than moral evil, than a deliberate choice to inflict harm or to dominate and control. And it's in this space, I think, that's where we have a challenge to find self-mastery and to temper those passions and to try to maybe do the opposite if we're driven to do so.
I mean, if you think about it as a kind of a self-regulating organism, um, then this is where, at least in the body politic and the social polity, the Gnostic has a role to reset balances when they go out of whack,
Right.
and not to remain quiet. Because that's in this plane of the manifest, that's not what the rules are about.
Right. So that maintaining of balance, that strikes another dharmic note with the whole idea of avatars descending when disorder begins to arise and the cosmic harmony goes out of whack.
Mm.
So I think we're seeing an Islamic parallel here.
Yeah.
And on a final note, I would like to discuss the language of the reversal of the sinners, where he's basically using sinners as a stand-in for the arafin.
Mm.
Um, that's also very interesting too. But is he also doing that out of a sense of the Malamati form of Sufism, the way
Yeah,
of blame?
that's a big
Is
part
it
of it. Yeah, that's a big,
okay?
yeah.
I thought so. I just didn't want to assume.
That's the big part of what he's doing, because I mean, according to Ibn Arabi, that is the highest station, the path of bliss.
Right, right. Because there's really no surefire way to efface your ego than to constantly be inviting criticism and condemnation. You can't really rest on your laurels that way.
In fact, for him, if you're not being criticized, and if the world doesn't turn at some point against you, you're not on the path.
Right. It's too easy to be a form of suluk.
Yeah.
No, that's very interesting. Thank you. I'll let somebody else go for
Sure
now.
thing. Sure thing. Well, saying?
I spent a bit of time focusing on this one passage on page 79, where he brings up perplexity. It's it's just such a remarkable passage. Basically, from where he says, "He who experiences this perplexity is ceaselessly centered on the pole from there down." So I mean, I've seen this kind of motif in other Sufi writings and poetry. You know, the God you're looking for is not anywhere out there; it's already within you. But this is really interesting because if you look at the language, I went to the Arabic and I wanted to know what he was saying. And so what he really says, it's the God-centered man is sahib al-harakat al-dawriya. So the person of like cyclical motion, right? So the concept here is of a revolution, a never-ending revolution around a center, as opposed to this kind of vector or going from point A to point B.
Yeah. Which is what he is criticizing about those who are seeking to transcend God.
Yeah, this is right. So they imagine the point A and the point B and everything in between. It's all just imagination. Whereas the reality is that the divine is already within you. But but this language of cyclical motion is really interesting. It just adds a kind of layer to it. And it to me it evokes the planetary spheres and all the kind of mythos that surrounds them, and also the
great observation. Just remember the next chapter on Enoch is when he starts to talk about the planetary constellations immediately after Noah.
Right. Yeah. So that also evokes ishq, right? That this other path. I mean, you could think of a linear path as also being based in love, but it seems that the way that Ibn Arabi is conceiving of love is a circular path. It's like specifically that's the way that he conceives of it. And then also
with whether it's Ibn Arabi or any of the other Sufis, this is a very central point. The path of ishq cannot be linear. If it's linear, it's not ishq. Why? Taqwa as opposed to ishq is linear. Okay? And but not taqwa in the sense of God consciousness, but taqwa in the sense of piety. So ishq is a path that must have a circular, non-linear way of getting there. Why? Because ishq seeks to encompass. You cannot encompass by going in a linear direction. Right? And also, why ishq requires encompassment is because ishq has facets. It's not just, a very straitjacketed kind of reality. And ishq, by definition, tests. If you're going in a linear fashion, sure, you can be tested, but you're not tested in the sense that you're bewildered because you know the end point. Whereas a non-linear circular path of ishq, you are being, at any point, you're being undermined. And a lover is tested by what? Their resolve. So if you're going circular and you fall off your, path, then you're tested to see whether you're willing to get up and traverse the path, even if you, don't know where you're going through this maze. So ishq is a maze, whereas taqwa is a sort of a straight line. But taqwa is the straight line that doesn't get you to your goal. Whereas with ishq, you may get to your goal, but that all is dependent on your result and your commitment and what you learned in that process. And the more you learn about the realities of love and bewilderment, the closer you get to the goal.
Yeah,
This is
that really
how one understands women, by the way.
that really fleshes it out.
Yeah.
And it's just the images are just so impactful. I mean, I mean, I can relate to this experience just in general of thinking about thinking in terms of goals, just but thinking of spirituality that way. It seems to often that linear path seems to just get stale.
Yeah.
Like because it does seem that you're kind of just making it up. You might think that it's the true path, but ultimately it turns out to just be some idea that you've created.
God created the faiths.
Yeah.
Yeah. The basis of much of this metaphysics. Yeah.
Whereas this is there's the passion. There's a connotation of that of something always acting on you in such a way that you don't know where it's going to come from next. And like you said, just getting back on it and trying to find that thread again and stay on it. It's a great image. And I had a question. I'm not sure exactly how to pose it. What's throughout this chapter, he's distinguishing between the Muhammadis, like the Muhammad's heirs, the Muhammadiyah, and the people of Noah, and it just raises the question for me of the idea that revelation is progressive, or it goes through cycles, and or it's progressively completing itself until it gets to Muhammad. Which I mean, I know this from other contexts, but just thinking about it now, it strikes me because it seems like what he's expressing throughout his work is this kind of universal. It's a universal truth that is supposed to be expressed through the scripture, through the Quran. So just thinking of philosophy and aiming at universality, it seems like actually, like, we can't. It wasn't always the case that people could access the universal truth or something like that. That it was only now. It seems strange to me because when I think of truth, I just think of, well, it's accessible at any time to anyone. But this almost makes it seem like only certain things are available to people at certain times. Like, you were talking about the Jewish theology. So sometimes you hear that the dispensation of Moses is a dispensation of just of majesty, and that of Jesus is just all pure mercy. And now with Muhammad, you have
both of them,
the Quran, that brings them together. So I don't know exactly what the question is, but just thinking about, like, if I lived in the time of the Mosaic dispensation, would I not have access, like, spiritually, to truths about God's immanence, or passion and love and these kinds of things?
Yes and no. I mean, Ibn Arabi is saying that these truths are available to those who strive for them, irrespective of the dispensation, right? Because God is immanent. It's not just, because a certain revelation is codified in text or uttered by a prophet figure, that then this makes the truth accessible. The truth is always accessible, according to him. It's whether it is, whether certain people are there to receive it, even without kind of a natib, a speaker, prophet. Right? And this is a very deeply implied kind of dialectic that is going on in this specific chapter, because obviously these people of Noah, before Noah's manifestation, were, one can argue by the argument of Ibn Arabi, were already kind of following a straight path of their own, based on their own idolatry. I mean, that's the implication of what he's saying. Right? But this was an imbalanced understanding of the nature of divinity. And so in order to rectify it, Noah had to kind of come and tell them, you're doing it wrong, even though they were doing it right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that makes more sense. I don't know why I got this sense from the way he speaks about the Muhammadis, that somehow they're in a privileged position in this time.
Because as a revelation day, the articulation came in both forms, not just one. It wasn't just emphasizing the transcendence as opposed to the immanence. So what he's also saying here is that, if you want to level this argument that I just put about Noah and level it at me and saying, and at me, that I'm saying the same thing about Muhammad, here's why I'm not saying the same thing. So to answer Jeff's question, he's saying, by emphasizing both aspects of transcendence and immanence, but the immanence articulated in its own way, by Muhammad. Muhammad circumvented that same problem that Noah had. Right? Noah was, talking about a God that was completely divorced from the very people he was preaching this God to about. Whereas, even though the Quraysh were worshiping idols and, effigies, etc., yet the God of Muhammad is both in the horizons and in the souls, even closer to them than the idols that they had amassed around the Kaaba or in their homes or whatever. Right? So this is where this gets really radical in what Ibn Arabi is saying, because when you read the first half, it is very easy to then turn around and say, as we were just talking with Jeff, well, then Ibn Arabi is implying this about Muhammad as well, right? And that is the logic. This is what he's saying, right? But he stops there and does just a beautiful, logical kung fu flip by bringing the issue of immanence, even making it even more imminent, right? Without negating the previous argument at all. Because the circumstances of what Scripture says about the situation of Noah and what we know about the situation of Muhammad and the early Muslims in Mecca has some very interesting similarities, but also very significant differences. According to Scripture, Noah was solely preaching transcendence. What we read from the Quran, it was happening, because both transcendence and immanence were happening at the same time. And in the immanence in the scripture of Islam brings the issue even closer, because the question that keeps coming up in these very surface debates between monotheists and pagans is that how can you worship a god or a deity that you cannot see, right? So Islam seeks to basically solve that problem by putting the divine sparks within not just the human being, but also making statements such as the famous Gabriel hadith, about Diyah Kalbi, right? Or the statements that we get either sometimes put in the mouth of the Prophet, sometimes in the mouth of Ali, where they say, I cannot worship a God that I cannot know or I cannot see. Right? So that's plugged in. So they can't, these kuffar cannot turn around and try to make accusations about, your God is divorced from all reality. Ours is right in front of us. We see it. Islam is saying, well, our God is in front of us too, right here, right now, with us, within you, within everything, even in those stones and effigies and everything else. So what comeback does the pagan then have to a rebuttal like that? because it subtly affirms while simultaneously rebuking. And this is the beauty of the dialectic that Ibn Arabi is putting in front of us. So, in a sense, you can also argue that the pagans themselves at the time of Noah were practicing a sort of illogic by at least, well, we know this is not the case because these pagan traditions have extremely sophisticated ideas about, what these effigies represent. And, it was very Sohrawardian in that sense. That the effigy was like kind of the material, theurgy of a theurge that is unseen. But if we take that surface argument, then the pagans were committing the same fallacy by refusing to even acknowledge a theurge, right? If they were taking these idols as merely, the actual complete instantiation of these gods, although we know that's not the case. That they had very sophisticated ideas about these gods and these effigies and idols. But what Muhammad does, or what Islam does, and what the Bible doesn't do, is that it plugs in that hole to that objection by the pagans, so that we have that imminence, right? So that counter argument is already just thrown out. Well, what retort do you have? Our God is already with us. We're not searching for a God, outside of ourselves. We're not having to necessarily go to a physical effigy to have that encounter. Our encounter is already always, the presence is always with us, within us, around us, in that rock, tree, you, me, everything else. So that becomes a sort of a meta-paganism in one sense, and especially in the hands of someone like Ibn Arabi.
That's nice. That's very intricate. I mean, the way that you have to kind of deal with the issue, if we want to attribute this all-comprehensive position to Muhammad and deal with the fact that he was destroying the idols. Yeah, that's a pretty nuanced way of doing it. Okay.
I mean,
Just one last.
We're looking at this all through the eyes of Ibn Arabi himself. This is what we're doing. Yeah.
Right. Ibn Arabi sort of extracting, according to him, extracting what the real message is of Muhammad. Yeah. Just one thing occurred to me. This is kind of speaking to something else. I think Nate said that there is a sense of like progressive revelation here too, right? I mean, the very last chapter of Qaisari was also talking about this, like introducing the book, so that in his time, in Noah's time, it is the case that he wasn't the one to reveal the totality. That there's a kind of, what is it? The Veris prophetess, the idea that comes from Ebionite Christianity, like this progressive completion until you get to Muhammad, and then you have like the full picture.
Yeah.
And so there's a way in which these other prophets are kind of meant to have a limited. The dispensation is meant to be limited.
Yeah. Also, because they can't, at the time when these revelations come, those people cannot contain anything more than what they're given. That's implied in what Ibn Arabi is saying here. Had they been more receptive, then more would have been given to them. And so these problems that we find, at least according to the narratives about what transpired, wouldn't have transpired.
Well, at the collective level, you mean? Like,
yeah.
Because there's always going to be individuals who can attain the totality, right?
Yeah.
At
yeah.
Time. Okay. Well, that also kind of helps me think about the book. I'm this I think that's the way that is the way the book is set up. Yeah, it's kind of going from the Adam to all the way to the completion.
Yeah. To the seal.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
No worries. Hassan. We can't hear you. There's no microphone. Nope.
And now?
Now it's fine. Yeah.
Okay. So, can you explain in what sense of piety it is a straight path compared to ishq, which is the circular?
In what particular example?
In the discussion you have with Hussein, comparing Sirat Mustaqil, as it was mentioned here, and Daira, that Ishq, love, it is the circular path, let's say, which encompass, and piety, it is
Good
the
point.
straight path.
Good point. First of all, just remember, according to Ibn Arabi, you can take the word mustaqim in two senses. One as in straight, one coming from istighama, right? So a mustaqim can be someone who's going straight or someone who is concerted in their path, going on the Sirat al-Mustaqim. So, and that Sirat al-Mustaqim can be circular. It doesn't necessarily have to be actually a straight line from point A to B, right? It means that you stay straight, stay on the path, even though it is a circular path. You are a mustaqim on that Sirat al-Mustaqim. That's what that also means. Otherwise, I mean, if you take the analogies literally, then it's silly because we know that the path of religion and the path of gnosis is never a straight path, right? So you either metaphorize the mustaqim element, the straight element of what that means straight. So, you know, you're ethical and you're constant and blah, blah, blah. But you can have a circular path and it can be straight based on who decides to stay on that path perpetually.
Okay, that resolves the paradox for me, because here it is very subtle play of dialectics. الصراط المستقيم, again, it is صراط مستطيل here in the chapter of Noah, but I strongly suspect that scribal error is possible, that it was
Sure.
صراط مستقيم too. Because Sirat Mustaqim, it is one of the major Quranic conceptions.
Yeah, from the Fatiha.
And it is in Fatiha, yes. And the circular path, interestingly enough, from the same root, it is what for the words of calamity and disaster, which is da'ira.
Yeah.
And here Sheikh Muhyiddin takes these two words and completely reverse their
Reverses their
meaning.
meanings.
That,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Another thing, I also wonder where was the error of Noah? Where was the error of his people? And the things, if it is meaningful at all to say that some of them was wrong, but the comparison which comes to my mind is the tale of Lughat Muran, the language of the ants, in the chapter of the Hupi and the owls. But in the specific interpretation of this chapter, where both the Hupi and the owls, they are Gnostics, they are Sufis, they know the esoteric truth very well. but the conflict between them, the reason for it is not about the particular thing which they are arguing, but the conflict is because the Hupi want to express openly the truth, while the owls they are saying no, you should do taqiyya. These truths are only for these people who are grown up enough to take it. And here, what comes to my mind that Noah is in the same position like the owls, and the people of Noah is in the same position as the Hupi
Yeah.
who wants to express openly.
Yeah, the truth. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good, very good observation. So it's a very opposite situation that we get in in that visionary narrative of Zoroardis. So yeah, that is pretty much the case. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because what Ibn Arabi is suggesting is that this path of exclusive transcendence is a path of constriction, whereas its opposite is the path of expansion, right? But what he's suggesting is that both of these, positions need to be united. You can't just have one over the other. And perhaps the people of Noah had gone so far in one direction that it was necessary as a necessary corrective to preach the opposite to them at the time. There was just there was no other way. The dialectic of the times demanded that if they had gone this far extreme, that you had to go this far extreme in order to balance the whole thing. That is implied, but ultimately what Ibn Arabi is saying is that, unless these two are made one and also understood to be delimited categories of understanding God, that you're blind completely. You don't get it. As simple as that. Could be a collective or an individual.
Another thing that from this chapter I think finally grasp a Quranic ayah which always was baffling me. When the idol worshippers are saying ما نعبدهم إلا ليقربونا إلى الله زلفى. The only reason we are worshipping this idols or these gods or whatever it is that by their intercession and intermediary we will come closer to God. Reading this ayah, always my understanding is yes, absolutely. What the idol worshippers are saying, it is true. Uh, because the concept of tawassul and shafa' and so on, it is present in the Islamic Sharia and Islamic belief. It is something which is established. It is not looked down upon. And I always wonder, okay, then what is the difference between tawassul and shafa' in Islam and idol worshipping? And here the answer comes that the following ayah, إِنَّمَا إِلَهُكُمْ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ فَلَهُ أَسْلِمُوا. That your God, let's say, little paraphrasing the meaning, it is the all encompassing God, meaning that you are worshipping this idol that by their intermediary you will come closer to God, but you do not realize that even this step is unnecessary because they are already manifestation of God. So they are not something which is void from divine manifestation. It is itself the God.
A divine manifestation. Yeah.
Okay, Sidi, I that's where okay, just to look, I think one more thing. Yes, and again, the conception of dawah, of calling to God, which here is called, how to say it, complete uh, lie or complete makr. What would be the English word for it?
Bruise,
Um,
bruise.
yes, because to say that we are calling to God already implies that something is void from a divine presence.
Yeah,
But the truth is, Allah Ta'ala, He is present everywhere.
yeah, yeah. And that is the key point. That that very concept, of the da'i Allah or da'i ilallah or da'i lillah, is loaded. If you take it literally from the linguistic construction, because it denotes that you're calling a people to something that is absent. But if you call, I mean, God is not absent, as in a vacuum. It's unseen, but it's not absent. So that whole concept, yeah, it needs to be kind of looked on very critically.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Yeah. Mary, if you're there, do you want to say something?
No, al-hikam, I'm here.
Okay.
I liked this talk about harm and dissent and rebellion earlier. And I've been thinking about it a little bit because the first thing I thought of when I heard can creation rebel was controlled opposition. And then the second thing I thought of was false prophets. But that came up a little bit, the name, the misguider. But if something really can go out of whack, I'd imagine it happens around false prophets and usurpers of traditions and things like that. So I liked that the conclusion was the Bhagavad Gita, the Arjuna conclusion, because it reminded me of the verse, the God demands that a cow be sacrificed. You know, it's like you have to put your money where your mouth is at some point. And when I'm thinking about how to deal with these fascists in our lives, how we should move through the world politically as Gnostics and as activists, I think it really is what Ibn Arabi said here about we should appeal to people on their inner and outer bases, not just one or the other. We should try to split the difference. And that's all. I just thought it was a very politically insightful.
It's very insightful
chapter.
because there really is no other effective way to do it.
Right. And it's interesting because he's not slighting Noah really in the I don't feel like it's too much of a slight against him. I think he's just basically talking political strategy a little bit. It seems very matter of fact to me.
100% agree. That's pretty strongly, very overtly actually implied throughout this chapter that it was a issue of strategy.
Right. And that's why that comes back around to what just came up, calling to God and dawa. Like, how should we do that? And are there ways to do it that don't even use the word God, for example, is simply enjoining right a form of calling to God in that way by appealing to the hidden element of it. I thought that this was a very useful chapter for an activist.
Oh, yeah. And amongst other people, yeah, very useful. I mean, this whole book, in my opinion, is very useful in that regard. Because it rewires your thinking about a lot of things.
Didn't you say you gave it to a physicist once?
Yeah, and he came back very disturbed.
Yeah.
Handed it back to me and he said, this is completely challenged my whole notion about the supremacy of science.
Well, it's just so matter of fact and dialectical, you know. It's very, very structured. It's very structuralist and it's in the way it approaches existence, God. Yeah. I didn't really have much to add. I just really liked the way the discussion went. To put the Bhagavad Gita thing in um Quranic terms, it might be said that, you know, jihad is the logical conclusion of fitna. Like if something's wrong, you have to make an effort
Yeah,
to correct
okay.
it once you've recognized that or cognized it.
Then you have to act. It's also a
Right.
rejoinder to those people who say, you know, that authentically spiritual people don't fight. I don't know how many times I've heard that from various people, and then you're
So
reminded,
often.
yeah,
So often. Yeah, they really like the shut up and sit down line.
yeah. Whereas there's no shut up and this and sit down, and even the Bible itself. I mean, Jesus's little rock star incident in the temple, and what he says to the priests and Pharisees, pretty unequivocal to the Christians. That
Right.
Christ was not a, you know, was not a sheep.
I don't know if it's a hadith or if it's in the Quran, but it's like it says that on the last day everyone will be resurrected and then they'll all start to fight and take out all their pains on each other. That's what I think of when I think of this sort of reckoning is, you know, we're going to be fighting on the plane of resurrection, aren't we? You know, we're going to be crossing blades.
Indeed. Indeed. Anybody else want to say anything more? No? All right. Well, next chapter is the chapter of Enoch.
Wahid, I'm so sorry. I actually do have one more question.
Sure, go for it. Go for it.
This is very brief, but at the end he refers to a book that is entitled The Mosul Revelations. I've never heard of this work of his. Can you say a few things about
Tanazzulat
that?
al-Mawsaliyah, it's a shorter treatise. It actually exists in one version in the Asai and Ibn Arabi. I have a copy of that here. It's one of his very interesting works. Covers pretty much the same ground of stuff that he covers elsewhere. But yeah, there he talks a little bit about Noah. Doesn't say significantly more than he says here.
Okay.
Which is why I find this very strange what he says here. And also, Mr. Ralph Austin wasn't aware of the fact that there is a version of this in the Hyderabad edition of the treatises of Ibn Arabi. He doesn't cite it. He thinks there's only a single manuscript in Istanbul. I think Pablo Benito may have translated it some years ago from one of the Ibn Arabi Society journals. I'm not completely sure, but there are people who have studied it, and there are texts of it around. It's not substantially different to anything else he says elsewhere.
Got it. I was just curious. At first I thought it might have been a typo and they meant Futuhat al-Makkiyah, but that's good to know.
Yeah. In the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, everything everything he has written about elsewhere. This is the thing about Ibn Arabi. You know, other than very slight variations, everything that he has said can be found in his Futuhat al-Makkiyah on pretty much all of the issues. And, you know, all these other treatises, they're a little bit, you know, there's slight variations between one another. So the two major works, if you really want to understand Ibn Arabi, is just basically the Futuhat and the Fusus, and maybe his Diwan of poetry. But then in the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, there's just chock full of poetry, most of which then ends up in his Diwan.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. No worries at all. Okay, well, for the following session 14 of Ibn Arabi, the Wisdom of Holiness and the Word of Enoch, it's a very interesting chapter. She is the one of the two chapters of the Fusus that he deals with the same figure. Anyway, until next week, for those of you coming to Sahuardi, I'll see you next Saturday. For those only coming for Ibn Arabi, I'll see you next week, same time. Yahak.